Mech pilots, online. BattleTech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In our third deployment of BungleTech, we take some time to break down our radical and probably not balanced house game modes, report on an epic attack by Aidan Pryde in our battlefield highlight, talk about a critical rule mistake that led to some wacky on-the-table outcomes, and read a sample of the short story Airs Above the Ground by Jason Hansa. Hold down those triggers, Mechwarriors, and get those PPCs charged up. This deployment is gonna be a blast.
Primary objective, podcast topic segment, initiating.
Hello, all my friends from the inner sphere, the periphery, and my brothers from the deep periphery. Welcome to episode 3 of the BungleTech podcast. I'm once again joined by the amazing, the stupendous, the wondrous Michael. Say hi, Michael.
Hello, friends.
Michael, episode 3. We're official.
Officially what?
Officially awesome. 3's when you become legit. Before then, it's like, is this podcast going to survive? Is it going to die? No, man, 3. 3's the magic number.
Do you actually have any stats to back that up, or are you just making this up on the spot?
This is just like how I play BattleTech, baby. Make it up on the spot. Pray it works out. Hope no one questions me.
Fortunately, I'm good at questioning you.
Why did I choose you as the co-host? Why? Great Kerensky, why? Okay, so today, in our main topic, we're going to discuss the game modes that we play when we play together. As we've mentioned previously in previous podcasts, we actually have designed some pretty wacky and fun custom game modes. So today, we are going to walk through those game modes. But before we start, I'm just going to give a quick shout out to the Ogre's Den. So the Ogre's Den is a gaming store in my area, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And they are doing a Mercenaries Kickstarter launch party this week. And it's going to be rad. It's happening. Let me double check the dates. Yeah, I wrote this down.
You were so prepared.
Where'd I write it down?
It's all falling apart.
I was so prepared.
Episode 3, no!
No, we're not going to make it. Okay, this Thursday to Sunday, so the March 23rd to the 26th, there's going to be 4 days of Alpha Strike and Classic BattleTech, and it's going to be super, super rad. There's going to be pizza pop and all that stuff. There's paid registration, obviously, and they're going to be handout and prizes. And the best part about these handouts is they're from the Mercenaries Kickstarter, I think. I'm pretty sure. But anyhow, I've seen the miniatures. They have the new miniatures that aren't going to be out for like, how long? Probably a year for the public to grab. And so you're going to be able to get these potentially sooner if you come and participate. So it's 4 days. You don't have to attend all days. They have games, I believe, in the morning and in the evening. And there's also some introductory games going on, which is pretty cool. But one of the reasons why I really want to mention this is that the game mode that they're playing is sort of unique, and I think it fits well with our game mode discussion. What they're doing is they're essentially setting up almost a blood pit scenario in which you can bring one mech into the game, and there's a pool of 40 mechs, 4 people at the table. You spawn in with the mech, you fight. Once that mech dies, you spawn in with another mech from the mech pool, and you keep on fighting until all the mechs are destroyed, or perhaps until the game times out. Not 100% clear yet. But it's gonna be fun, and it's pretty cool. It's sort of like it feels like a blood pit scenario, except a blood pit scenario in which your pilot can't die because your pilot's just jumping back and forth. Actually, wait, no, that's not true, because your pilot skill will be different.
Can you maybe explain what a blood pit scenario is for those of us who don't know what that is?
So I'm just making that up. Blood pit's not an actual thing.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm catching up here.
Okay, no. Blood pit is a thing, but a blood pit is, I believe it's on Solaris 7 or it was Galliport. Basically, they're like the low-end fighting stables. An urban mech with a broken AC-20. So just the small lasers working. Those blood pit matches are just like, a low-end Solaris skirmish, as I understand it from the lore.
And so then how this one's going to work is people will come in with essentially a grab bag of mechs one at a time? And then how do you actually win? Or can you win?
You can win. It's point-based. All they've said so far is you get points for killing and points for contributing to kills. But they haven't explained the points yet, so we don't actually know, because they don't want people to game the system. But essentially, you bring in a mech that has a BV of 2250 to 2500, and you can decide to use that mech at any time as you're playing. But if the mech dies, essentially. If you play multiple games over the weekend, you're locked into that mech choice. But once again, you still have access to that pool of mechs, but you're essentially accumulating points. So if you think of it more like you're the force commander of the Blood Pit, all right, John, get in there. Oh, John's dead. Okay, Smith, go. Let's go. Just chucking people in there for points. That's more what it's going to be like.
So if I'm coming to this, I feel like the mech I want to bring, I feel like my strat would be something that can like hit as many targets as possible. I just want like 8 lasers that I can just spray in all directions, get one tag on every person, and then I just get points for assisting every death.
Yeah, and that's actually, funnily enough, sort of the strategy I'm coming into it with my mech. Although my strategy is a little bit weird. We all admit that I can be considered a bit of a strange person, right? Let's just agree that some people think I'm a little bit strange, and that's okay. I can be strange. My strategy is all based on the concept that I believe there's going to be a Jenner 2C as a random prize, okay? And I love the Jenner 2C. As a matter of fact, the only mech I feel that has been missing from the pack so far that I actually want is the Jenner 2C, because I'm a huge fan of Jenners, as you know, playing Mechwarrior Mercenaries with me, Michael, and our vast Jenner and Firestarter collection.
Yep, and they're always extremely effective.
Exactly.
I could really understand why you love the mech. It just seems like the best mech. I don't know why they built anything heavier or sturdier or with functioning arms.
They did it because they wanted people that weren't as good a pilot to be able to still compete on the battlefield. So they're like, we'll give them an Atlas. Save the Jenners for the good pilots. Give the noobs the Atlases. That's what I think.
Okay, so anyway, you really want a Jenner 2C
Yes.
to add to your collection.
So, I'm bringing as my mech to the battle a Jenner. Because I feel like if a Jenner comes to the battle, naturally, its mating call will attract the Jenner 2C to me from the universe. That's my plan.
I thought that we were going to get some actual strategy here, but my hopes were misplaced. Have you picked the specific variant? How are you going to spend 2,500 points on a Jenner?
Well, in the rules, you're allowed to modify your piloting and gunnery skill. And I looked through all the Jenners because we're only allowed up to Jihad. So I looked through all the Jenners and I was like, okay, what Jenner will actually give me enough BV once I crank it up and is valid? And there was only actually 2. And I chose the variant, I forget the variant name, but it has 4 ER medium lasers and a C3 slave, which I won't be using. It's a 711-5. I cranked up my piloting gunnery to 0-1. So this is the God Jenner. It's going to die when it gets shot once, but my God, is this the Jenner pilot of the gods?
I feel like you're going to be a bit outclassed.
The Jenner's going to come on the battlefield and it's just going to battle cry. And out there in the universe, there's going to be a little Jenner 2C sitting on a mountain where it's going to be like, my love, I will come and find you. And then when the random mech draws come, all of a sudden there's going to be a Jenner 2C in my hands. The precious Jenner 2C.
And then you'll have 2 Jenners.
And then I'll have 2 Jenners. And I'll paint them in the same color scheme and they'll be a little family and then I'll have a little baby Jenner eventually. It's the perfect family I've always wanted.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing how the strategy works out in the next episode.
Exciting. So yes, if you are anywhere near Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and you are free this Thursday through Sunday, make sure to swing by Ogre's Den and check out this event because it's going to be super fun. You can come and try to kill my Jenner. It's impossible. Jenners are invincible. They are the best mech. It's a 0-1 pilot. You can't touch me. I'm just going to jump jet to the stars. Anywho, to the topic at hand. Let's discuss our game modes. All right, Michael, so why did we invent our own game modes?
So I guess really it came. I think we sort of touched on this in the last episode, but we when we were first sort of getting the current group going and we were playing, people were still getting a feel for the rules, so everything ended up being a death match. And honestly, death matches are kind of the least interesting game mode, in my opinion. You just end up rolling dice until 4 in the morning because someone just won't die, and then at the end of it, all the mechs are mostly destroyed. One mech's still standing. Hooray! It's fun to sort of just roll dice and stuff, but I find it a lot more interesting to think about when you're trying to accomplish something on the battlefield. That's why I'm a big fan of game mode. So we try to come up with sort of ideas for how do we make something that is interesting to play, makes the battlefield a bit more dynamic because people are trying to actually accomplish things. And in your case, I think that it's because you like the chaos of sudden upsets when someone achieves an objective, or you like really complex tactical scenarios where everyone's trying to do different things at the same time. I think that it just sort of makes the battles more exciting, and we weren't really happy with the ones that were in, I think it's Total Warfare. You found them sort of samey, and I haven't tried most of them, but they're not as exciting as what we've come up with.
Yeah, exactly. They were in campaign operations, but it just felt more same than different, as they say in Thai, same but different. That's what all the game modes in campaign operations feel like. Same but different, which basically means they're more similar than not. And the game modes that I think we made really sort of stretch things a bit and feel quite diverse. And if a game mode's diverse, it means that what you're bringing to the table needs to be different to be successful, and it encourages you to try different things. But totally, like all our games at the beginning were just, death matches. We all fight to the death. We all fight to the death. And it's actually funny because the only game mode that we don't actually have a documentation for, real core format of game mode, I'd say, is a death match. We feel like we don't even need to qualify that, right? A death match is just the status quo per se.
Yeah, the default.
So let's talk about our first game mode. So our first game mode is a basic attack and defend. We use battle value limits. So basically, the attackers have 6,000. The defenders have 6,000 plus 500 battle value for turrets or artillery support. And we say that each artillery point, and these are from the artillery field support deck, I believe, we say that each point on there has a battle value of 40. Basically, in this game mode, the defender, aims to defend 3 buildings in their base, and the attacker tries to destroy them. It's that simple, but we do throw some randomness in there when the game is being built to sort of make it a little bit more diverse. For example, when we set up the map, the defender randomly draws the starting side of the map. They then are able to place up to 9 hexes of terrain on that map, plus their 3 targeted buildings. The life of the buildings is based on the maximum that the opposing lance can do in a single round of damage, assuming they all alpha strike and everything hits. So basically, you take that damage, you equate it to the construction value, and you spread it across the targeted buildings as you see fit as the defender.
And it's just one, sorry, because it's a multiple of the alpha strike damage, right? Or am I misremembering that?
It's basically the whole lance, single alpha strike, their maximum damage output in a single round.
And that's just that number of points.
That number of points spread across the CV or construction value of the buildings as you see fit as a defender.
I thought it was more than that. Am I misremembering? My mind's going.
Well, it's funny because it doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually turns out to be a lot, especially when the defender is allowed to allocate the CV as they see fit, and the attacker doesn't know what the construction value of the buildings are, and because the defender can also set up terrain. So he can set up additional buildings or, hills or something like that in front of the buildings. So you can really essentially encase these things.
Yeah, and just to give credit, where did you get that idea? Because I remember someone had told you that as a nice rule of thumb, right?
Yeah, so I talked to the Calgary BattleTech League about that. So Calgary BattleTech League is this, I haven't mentioned them before, but they're actually one of my inspirations for creating this podcast because they're a really amazing community in Calgary, and they run a competitive BattleTech League. They've been doing it for years. I'm going to get them on the podcast eventually to talk about it, but they have a wealth of knowledge of BattleTech. And so when I was creating this game mode, I was like, what is the right value for a defenders to have? Because the common sentiment regarding attack and defend in the community is that it's always harder to defend than it is to attack. And so we consulted with them. That's how we created that construction value. And then we decided to add the 500 plus battle value for turrets or artillery, which actually goes a long way.
Yeah, so I think that that's sort of, the giving some sort of static defenses to give just a little bit of an edge for the defender. And then the other thing we did for this is we put a soft time limit on the attack where essentially the attacker has 10 rounds to get it done. And then after those 10 rounds, the defender starts getting random artillery support from Nathan's artillery support deck every turn. It forces the attacker to be fairly aggressive because 10 turns it's enough time to do the attack, but it's not enough time to waste time. And it's just enough pressure that it forces the attacker to make some questionable tactical movements. And it's generally been a pretty interesting game every time we've done it.
Yeah, and what's great about that rule that we have is that it's just the potential to get hit by artillery. So the defender would draw a random card from the artillery deck, and they still need to roll it. So as we know, the higher damage the card, the more challenging the 2-hit roll. So it definitely is a push. And also, oh yeah, it only goes on one of the opponent's mechs. It doesn't hit the entire lance. It just, targets one. I mean, if two are beside each other and there's a splash, that's a different situation. Everything's random. But it's just that real threat that you have to get in and get out by end of turn 11, or else you're going to get popped.
Those are two of the big things that I think make the attack and defend work and help make it a bit more dynamic. The other thing that I think is really key here is the turrets. And Nathan, you've tried to explain to me before what the actual rule for turrets is, and we've both agreed that we don't understand it and we don't like it. So what do we do instead?
Well, we sort of simplify it. To make a turret in the game, you have to make a building. And then basically the turret becomes the strength of the building. There aren't standalone turrets. When I was searching and hunting through what to do, a big recommendation of the community was to just use vehicles and make the vehicles static and count them as turrets. So basically, I created a battle value equivalent for set sort of turrets, and we utilized that. Yeah, I forget the exact numbers. I'd have to look up the list again. But basically, we had like vehicle equivalents of turrets. And I went back and sort of double checked eventually and used the actual rules to actually build the turrets. And it was remarkably close. So to me, it was like, it's easier, it's quicker. You choose a vehicle, you look at their battle value, you do a little modifier because it can't move and stuff like that. And that becomes your turret.
And so if we wanted to, really get into it, we could just write up stat sheets for a bunch of turrets because really what we're looking for is video game turrets. We want it's a vehicle, but it can't move. And then, some cool mechs blow them up. So, and I don't think that honestly, getting the battle value exactly right is that important because the turrets aren't too threatening by themselves. It's not like we don't want the game to be about breaching a static defense line. The turrets just add an extra little bit of damage, plinking here and there, and an extra obstacle wastes a couple shots from the attackers to actually get rid of them, or maybe they try to ignore them and have to deal with a bit of extra damage in their backs. Getting the battle value exactly right hasn't been too important in our experience.
The turrets have been something that you need to be concerned about and respect, but it just goes in the mind of the attacker that they can't really maybe put their back to it without consequence. So it slows down the assault. The situation we had where the turrets were the most important was when I had the tag turrets and I was using the arrow IV.
I was actually going to bring that up as an example of something you probably shouldn't do with your turrets, or you shouldn't let people do with your turrets.
I still think that was okay. It's just you need to kill the turrets. The attackers decided to run through the turrets and not kill them. That's an example of a turret that, you have to respect, But just respect it by destroying it. It's -4 to hit. You're not going to miss it. It's just you have to spend the resources to deal with it, essentially. And I think in that game mode, I was afforded 4 with LRM-5, Artemis, and Tag.
And I'm gonna disagree here and say that I think tag is the sort of thing you shouldn't allow on turrets, not without some actual thought behind it, because tag sort of acts as a force multiplier for all of your missile mechs. So having them be able to make all of your LRM mechs better, let alone your Arrow 4 slingers get better, I think that's maybe risky, but something we'd have to play out a few times. I wasn't actually at that match, so I've only heard secondhand the horror stories of what the Arrow 4 missiles raining down, orphans crying, fires burning, tearing through the lines of the poor attackers.
If we didn't have the through armor breach rule mistake that we made that game, it might not have been as bad either. But that 750 BV did take into account the modification price of all the LRMs and ARYV. Like that was the actual, like the BV cost was accurate anyhow. But having 4 turrets with tag is pretty awesome as a defender that's using Arrow 4. In case you're wondering, world.
So then leading on, so these 2 game modes, they're not really 2 game modes in my mind, but we have them written down as 2 different game modes. But yeah, so the one that we're talking about here wasn't actually strictly an attack defend. Instead, it was an attack defend retrieve, which is a bizarre concoction Nathan came up with because we had 5 people coming one day. And so we spread out into 2 attackers, 2 defenders, and 1 retriever, because Nathan loves his wild cards. So it's basically the same as the attack defend for the 2 factions. The attacker and the defender, they have the same battle value, but the defender gets some turrets. You get the allocation, or you get 3 different defense points that you need to protect. All that part is the same. We just add an extra 3rd faction on the field, which is the retriever, and they randomly determine one of the 3 objectives, one of the 3 buildings, and that is their objective to scan. Their job is to get close to the objective, scan it, and then run to their extraction point. I find it the most chaotic games we ever play are with 3 different people all in a Mexican standoff around these little defense points. Nathan, I know you love this one.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing because every person, they're only successful when the other 2 fail. And for example, the defender wants to make sure that their buildings aren't blown up, and it wants to make sure their data isn't stolen. The attackers want to make sure the buildings are blown up and that the data isn't stolen, and the retriever wants to steal the data before it's blown up. And so there's some really interesting dynamics and treacheries that happen on the battlefield, and every time it's been different. So I think the first time we played this game mode, a situation arose where the retrievers and the attackers were just like, we're on the same side. And they just stormed the gates of the defenders. But then at the last moment, the retriever betrayed the attackers. Another time when we played this, it was straight from the beginning. The retriever straight away took a pot shot at the attackers. Straight away.
Just setting the tone for the battle.
And then after that, charged the defenders. Everyone was like, what's happening? Like, what's going on here? It's so psychological. And the retriever only has 3,000 battle value, and it's a single mech. That's one of the rules. So basically, the retriever's coming in light, and it's supposed to represent the attacker is an established force, the defenders are established force, and the retriever is someone who's opportunistic, like a pirate or a mercenary. And we throw some cool things in there, like when the defenders, have the random side of the map, and then they set up they know their placement, and they set up their defense and stuff like that. We set it so that the retriever actually gets to choose where they're starting on the map, like in terms of along the border of the map, and where they actually need to extract from. So they get more control. They're sort of like a high risk, high reward player. Because technically they're the easiest to kill, easiest to knock out of the game. But if the attacker and the defender decides to unify and take out the retriever at the beginning, that is just putting pressure on the attacker, because now the attacker knows they're losing turns and that they're going to have to deal with the defender after, and the artillery is going to be coming eventually. So there's no good decision to make. There's no good decision, and it just makes it super chaotic. So of these two game modes, how do they both feel, and which one do you prefer?
I like the simpler stuff. I like the attack defend. Honestly, that's my favorite game mode of what we play because I think that it's just sort of a nice objective based game. I think the attack defend retrieve can be a lot of fun, especially when you have too many people at the table. I think it works pretty well for making sure everyone has something to do. It's never devolved too badly. We've generally been the types of players where all the factions are still in the game until the end. No one goes out of their way to just blow the retriever off the map before they even get a chance. Um, and I think that comes in, like you say, because you are basically, if you take the time to destroy the retriever, then you're giving up time to actually accomplish your objective. I don't think I'd recommend attack, defend, retrieve for running a tournament or something, but it's fun if you've got a weird number of people to try it sometime.
I love the attack, defend, retrieve because I love that chaos on the battlefield and that unspoken negotiation between different forces. Am I going to do this? When am I not? When am I going to betray? When does the hammer drop? There's lots of suspense to this game mode. I'm actually surprised by how well it works. You think it wouldn't play out so well, but every single time we've played it, it's confusing and stuff. Don't get me wrong, it's confusing, it's a mess, but the game always comes out really close. And I think,
I'm also shocked by that. There is no reason it should work as well as it has.
all right, well, let's go to the next one. Salvage drop recovery.
Yeah, so this one's also this one I'm also actually I sort of like this one. Um, the idea behind this is basically having little objectives that you need to capture that so it's not necessarily, the goal doesn't really have anything to do with blowing something up. The real goal is to grab an objective and get it off the battlefield. So I like that for a change of pace. We bring in two equivalently sized lances. You start out just on opposite sides of the map. Then after 3 turns in, we pick somewhere near the middle of the map where objectives are going to drop in. And then a couple turns after that, we actually drop down objectives and you score points by getting a mech there, grabbing the objective, and then leaving the map with it. That's sort of the general structure of it. I guess sort of we've narrowed it down. So the current rules that we have are 2,500 battle value for each side, only 3 units per lance. But I think last time we played it, we did more than that, right? Um, I think that this works with sort of lots of different sizes of mechs.
I think we had last time it was a 4-way battle, and a we had a 2 lances of 2, and we had no 3 lances of 2 and a lance of 1 actually.
And it wasn't like 4-way, it was 2v2. We had three mechs on one side and 4 mechs on the other side, and I think we had, what was it, 5,000 battle value for each side.
No, this is the one we played with Kyle, right?
Oh, you're right. Hang on, I'm getting this confused with. No, so what did we do last time?
I think the one with Kyle was on the desert map, right?
Right, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. We played another game after that.
With Christopher?
No, even after that
Play a lot of BattleTech.
with Dan.
Dan was in the one with Kyle.
No, the other one
The other
with
one.
Dan and Jeremy.
Oh, Dan and Jeremy.
And you two were one side and we were the other side. Gosh, we have played so much BattleTech and we're experimenting all the time. So chances are the rules as we describe them here will not be how we play them in a few months because we're tuning things in still.
You were right. That was salvage drop recovery, but it was team based.
So long story short, it works with a variety of different battle value. You can decide how many objectives you want to drop, but it probably should be an odd number. So we've done 1 and we've done 3. And then what we did is we had 2 battle maps put together, and then the objectives could drop in any of the 4 quadrants in the middle. So not the edges that people spawned on, specifically in those middle hexes. Just rolled randomly to see which of those quadrants each of the objectives is going to drop into. And so that's at the end of turn 3. We figure out which quadrant the objectives are going to fall into. So that gives people a chance to start positioning to cover areas and be ready to grab those things. And then at the end of turn 5, you roll the specific hex and the objective pops up in all of those different hexes. Then you got to grab it and you got to run. We've tried a few different things for that. The first rule that we tried was sort of like the scanning rule we used. I guess we didn't mention this for the retrieve game mode actually. So it's the same rule that we used for both of them for scanning, and that's a pilot check, but with attack modifiers. It was something like that, right?
Yeah, it's pilot check with the movement modifiers and then +1 based on every hex you're away from it.
Yeah. So you could actually do it from a distance, but it would be difficult. So pilot's check plus your movement modifiers plus 1 point or 1 on the roll per hex that you are away from the objective. That's what you did the first time. And did we have a rule where you could take it from someone? It was only essentially if the mech was destroyed that you could.
Yeah, you could pick it up from their dead corpse.
So that's how we did it the first time. I think it worked pretty well. It did lead to some frustrating moments where like bad rolls meant that someone was like standing on top of the objective trying frantically to pick it up, but they couldn't because their pilot had butterfingers.
That was Dan Zeus, yeah, before he punched himself in the head.
Yeah, he had a few pilot problems there. And then what we tried the last time around was using the actual pickup rules from tactical operations. You needed to move on top of it. You needed to have your mech go hull down. Then you just sort of declare you picked it up. You need to stand up out of hull down, which takes 2 movement points and a pilot skill check. And then you could start moving after that. But you needed to have a hand actuator because it was actually a physical thing you needed to pick up. So I like that because you had to actually move there. You had to commit to it, but it wasn't so chance based. What do you think, Nathan? Which of those pickup rules do you like better?
Using the actual pickup rules is better because it's more challenging from a tactics perspective, but less challenging from a just random rule perspective, if that makes sense. And so I think that's a good call.
Yeah, so that worked pretty well. And then it's just whoever gets the most of those things off the map. I think how we did it last time is we had each faction spawn on one side, like one short end of the map. The objectives dropped in the middle of the map, and then you had to get it back off your side wherever you came in. We actually discussed maybe doing like I don't know, a mech version of football, and you have to get the objective off the other team's side of the map. I think could be kind of fun and exciting, and avoid a case where just like a fast mech picks up the objective and then it just runs away really fast. It works well, but it can also be a bit of a bummer if you're on the other side and you're like, well, can't catch up, too slow.
And that's another reason I think that the turn 3, like the fact that it doesn't drop actually to turn 5 is really important because if you start out with it dropping straight away, just take light mechs. Like take a light mech and take a sniper mech that can back up that light mech. That's what you would do. That would be the successful build. But because now there's something happening on the battlefield and you're waiting for 5 turns, you can say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take an assassin just in case people bring lights, and it's my objective just to hunt down these light mechs and kill them. Or you know what? I think this guy's going to bring an assassin, so I'm going to bring something really heavy. I'm going to bring a thug into the battle. I'm going to blow this assassin out of the air. I think there's lots of different strategies you can take because of those turns. And I love how, at the end of turn 3, once again, we know the general quadrant, but we don't know the hex. Now you look at the map differently. All of a sudden, you're looking at different vantage points because you know it's in there, and everyone moves in together. So
Totally. I I like this game mode. I want to play it some more because I think there's a lot of potential in it. So I'd like to keep tuning it. The next one's sort of your baby, right, Nathan? I would never have thought this thing up.
So this game mode is called Hero Hunt, and I was actually inspired on the topic of Ogre's Den. One of the staff members there, his name is Kelvin. He was telling me how he took one of the legendary Mechwarriors from the legendary Mechwarrior pack and faced it off against a elite lance. Basically took Natasha Kerensky against a heavy lance, and Natasha Kerensky just blew them all out of the water. So if you don't know, the legendary Mechwarrior pack is built with some really good pilot cards with their matching mechs. So you have Aidan Pryde, Grayson Death Carlisle, Morgan Kell, and Natasha Kerensky. Their hero cards, like some of them are 0/0 for pilot skills. Some of them are, 1/2. Regardless, they're all ridiculously good, just like my Jenner is going to be. And the concept of this game is pretty simple. Someone spawns in with the hero, and the opposing force need to kill that hero before that hero reaches extraction. We give battle value based on the how good that individual hero is. And it's pretty easy to calculate because basically you just take their piloting skill, you do sort of reverse calculation with the mech they're using. So for example, if you're hunting Aidan Pryde, you get 7,000 BV to try to kill him. If you're hunting Natasha Kerensky, you get 9,300 battle value to try to kill her. Hero mech is randomly spawned on the far end of the board. Hunting Lance spawned on the other side. At end phase of round 3, a hidden extraction point is randomly determined, and the mechs just smash, or rather, the hero mech tries to sneakily navigate their way to extraction as the opposing Lance tries to get him and destroy him before it happens.
We've only played this once so far, and the non-heroes had a bit of a run of bad luck, including a Night Star that was knocked out during the movement phase of turn 2 before it had even fired a weapon. But overall, I think that this sort of works surprisingly. The attackers, or I guess the non-heroes, have an advantage because they've got a lot more mechs and a lot more weapons, but it kind of balances out because on top of being excellent pilots with generally powerful mechs, the heroes all also have different abilities, which aren't the usual abilities from the that most of the pilot cards have. They have abilities that explicitly break the rules. And so I think it ends up being a lot closer than you would expect. Because the one that we played, you had Morgan Kell, right?
No, I had Aidan Pryde.
Oh, you had Aiden Pride. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Con of the Jade Falcons.
How could I forget? And essentially, their pilot skill let you move and attack out of turn. You could do your attacks during the movement phase, if I remember correctly.
Yes, essentially, I would activate it in end phase the round before, and then I could move and attack a target before that target moved.
So that's very powerful, and it really helps even out just the weight of numbers that the non-hero has.
In a cat and mouse situation, the hero mech really stands a chance. And when we played this game originally, the rule that we had was that the hero mech knew his extraction point at the beginning. And this was a mistake because it made the game feel less like hero hunt and more like hero chase.
Popping smoke everywhere.
It was a weird situation. So I think changing the rule so that the extraction point of the hero mech is randomly determined at end phase of round 3, and it can't be in the same quadrant as the hero mech, that's going to change things dramatically, and I think it's going to be much more interesting. So I'm excited to try it again.
Yeah, I'd be down for trying this game again. Interestingly, I think I'm much more interested in playing the non-hero. I really like the sort of I like basic units. And so personally, the idea of playing like a super mech with super powers, it's not as exciting to me.
So the next game mode we have is called Royal Escort. And so this is pretty self-explanatory.
Is it? I when you started telling me about this game mode, I did not have any idea what you were talking about. maybe it's because you are steeped very deeply in the BattleTech lore, but when you're like, "Oh, it's a royal escort," that made no picture in my mind.
You're escorting a royal. I guess we could call it noble escort. Actually, that's what it should be called, noble escort, not royal. You're escorting a noble. I'm editing it right now. It's now called noble
That
escort.
it didn't explain it anymore. I still don't get it.
There you go.
All right. Tell me about Noble Escort. Oh, I just saw it. It just changed in the Discord. I just saw it pop up a new version.
This is a standard escort mission, but we wanted to make it more fun. I don't really think there's, when I was looking at campaign operations, I don't remember there being any effective rules to really do an escort. There's obviously protecting sites and stuff like that. Anyhow, not that I recall. But we set this up by there being an assassinator group and escort group. Assassinators have 4,000 battle value, the escorts have 5,500 battle value, and the royal, or the noble as it is now being called officially, is either a randomly determined medium clan or heavy inner sphere mech with a total skill level of 9. That's a standard 4-5 pilot, or you can make him 3-6 or 6-3 or whatever you want to do. Essentially, how it works is the escorts have to guard the noble across 4 half map lengths, and the assassinators must kill this royal before extraction. And here's the key difference: they don't have to just destroy the mech, they have to kill. So, like, for example, if they take out 2 legs and the mech's down on the ground, it's out of commission, no, they have to kill the royal. You got to keep on shooting until he's completely, until he's done, until, the core explodes or until the cockpit is gone. To make this work, we had to create an AI sort of system for the noble. So essentially, the escorters control their own lands. And then they also are controlling the AI, sort of. Basically, you roll at the beginning of the game a d6. If you get 1 to 2, the AI is aggressive, 3 to 4, restrained, 5 to 6, cowardly. The constraints that govern this royal is that they will always attempt to move closer to the extraction point during their movement phase with at least walking MP, unless they are hit. And when they're hit, then you change their behavior based on their personality. So if they're aggressive, on turn after the hit, they move towards the person that's attacked them with running MP, and if heat is lower than 10, they attack their nearest target with all weapons up to medium range. If they're restrained, on turn after hit, their minimum MP they can use is running in skilled evasion type movement mode, and they only ever will attack with a maximum of half of their loadout. And if they're cowardly, on the turn after the hit, they will retreat from extraction with walking MP, and the unit will never intentionally overheat.
And so these are essentially extra constraints on the escorts, because the escorts get to pick what the noble is doing, but they will have extra constraints to have to contend with. Is that right?
That's exactly correct. Essentially, we needed, like, we all hate escort missions when we play them in video games. Because we always think the escort's doing something, stupid. They're always moving. They're moving into enemy fire or whatever. And so we wanted to, in many ways, we wanted to emulate that, the randomness of the escort. And I realized that if the noble was completely under control of the escorts, then there'd be no reason for them to go to extraction. They would just kill the assassinators. It would just make sense to try to fight them and keep the royal behind. But now that the royal is being forced to move to extraction and behaves differently depending on the AI that is hiddenly rolled, that changes things. Another cool thing to sort of make this more fun is that the assassinators, because once again they have 4,000 battle value, much less in comparison, they actually start the game mode out hidden. We use the hidden unit rules. But unlike the standard double blind rules, the assassinators essentially, once they know what side of the map the noble is going to be coming from, they're allowed to place all their units where they want, hidden. And it's up to them to identify in the spotting phase, which happens after the movement phase, if line of sight has been met or breached. What do you think about this one?
It sounds wacky to me, as many of Nathan's high concept game modes tend to be. But I think it'll be fun. We'll have to see whether the escort rules become a little bit, whether they like bog things down because you're having to work around a bunch of constraints, or well, we'll have to see how it actually plays. But I think on paper it seems like it should be a fun game mode. Um, I guess we're slated to play this next time, and I'm going to be the assassinator. And I don't know what the behavior is going to be. So I guess that's something I need to work out on the day of once I can get my first shot on the target.
Yeah, that's 100%. I think it's important to have that because if we knew what the AI was before the lance was built, I think it would be very easy to make a lance that could abuse the AI's behavior. And so now there's like a little bit of randomness in there. You can still obviously like abuse the aggressive. You just set up sniper units and constantly hit him and force him to charge at you. But the escorters, they can do things to mitigate that. And I think that not knowing just adds a little more balance.
Yeah, me too.
I'm excited to try it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see this. It's the newest in the list of crazy, chaotic game modes. We'll see how it goes.
So in summary, the game modes we discussed today are attack, defend, retrieve, salvage, drop, recovery, hero hunt, and noble escort. So these are all our primary game modes that we've developed, thought a lot about. There are some other game modes that we've already brainstormed, but we haven't played them yet. So we're going to wait off a little bit on those ones because we think they still need a little more development. And one thing that we didn't actually dive into is that the end conditions of these games, or the win condition rather, are victory point based for most of these games. And we assign victory points based on certain criteria. We didn't want to get into the minutia a little bit, but for example, in the concept of the noble escort, victory points are lost based on the battle value of a lost mech as a ratio to total battle value spent. We have things like that built in there to essentially give us points. In the previous podcast, we mentioned how we didn't like the feeling of battles being like win or lose, and creating those victory points really adds the scope of success. And campaign operations does a similar thing. We just take a little bit of a different twist on it.
More chaotic twist.
Yes, embrace the chaos. And also, this is something we're going to discuss next time. Each of these game modes, layered underneath of them, have something called hidden objectives. Every game mode plays out differently when we're layering them with the hidden objectives. But that's a big discussion, so we are going to cover that in the next podcast.
So of these game modes, which is your favorite?
My favorite is attack, defend, retrieve, because embrace the chaos, baby.
Some of my favorite gaming moments have come from just the attack and the defend, and I think I like it because it's the one that feels like you have the most opportunity to set up a strategy before you hit the table, and then you're trying to implement that strategy once you're there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's my favorite.
So far, they've all been really, really fun. And if anyone wants more details on the game modes, the actual specifics as we've documented them, because these are all documented in a way that would make sense to a neutral party, hopefully reading them, because we obviously, we're BattleTech players, always got to go back to the rules. Just feel free to send us an email, and we will share them 100% if you want to try them out yourself and give us your own ideas. Until next time.
Pew, pew, pew. That's the sound of BattleTech, baby.
Tertiary objective, Battlefield Outcome Report segment. Initiating.
This is Nathaniel Smith with Iron and Boots on the Ground, coming to you live from Tukayid as a pristine and precision-led Comstar lance in the distance spreads its web aiming to ensnare Aidan Pryde, Khan of the Jade Falcons, allegedly sighted in this region. The Battle of Tukayid so far has been fierce, with heavy losses on each side of the conflict. However, the inner sphere remains resolute, as Comstar's strategies seem to be keeping the clans pushed on their heels, and upcoming... Wait just a moment. What's that there in the distance? Is that... My God! It's Aidan Pryde's Mad Cat! How is he moving so fast? My God! That Night Star's head was ripped right off! That's improbable! We have to get out of here! We have to get out of here now!
What happened? Well, after maneuvering behind his opponent, Aidan Pryde's Mad Cat delivered 2 blows to the head of a pristine Night Star, killing him instantly. How did it happen? We were playing our custom game mode Hero Hunt. The objective of the game, as previously referenced, is simple. One side chooses a hero from the legendary Mechwarrior Force Pack. The pack contains Grayson Carlisle, Natasha Kerensky, Aidan Pryde, Jamie Wolfe. In case you didn't know, they are all designed to be quite badass. The objective of the hero in this mode is to simply extract. The objective of the opposing lance is to defeat the hero before then. The encounter came about as the opposing lance was trying to ensnare the hero. Unfortunately, they were unaware of Aidan Pryde's pilot ability, Combat Intuition. Simplified, this ability allows the pilot to self-inflict a pilot hit without a consciousness check. After doing this, they're able to complete their movement, weapon attack, and physical attack against a set target before they move. This essentially allowed Aidan Pryde to double move and position his Mad Cat, or Timberwolf, behind the Night Star within a clear line of sight. He then attacked with 2 ER large lasers and a follow the leader LRM-20 shot that rolled a cluster of 12. A single ER large laser and the LRMs hit, and both hits landed on the head. That's 22 damage to the head, on a Night Star, the heaviest and most threatening unit of the opposing lance that hadn't even had the chance to take a single shot that battle. Ouch. That's BattleTech, baby.
Secondary objective, rule check discovery segment. Initiating.
So in today's rule check, this is a mistake we've been making for quite a while, and it's actually regarding the advanced criticals table. And the rule mistake is pretty simple, but I'm still confused about it when I read the advanced criticals, so I always got to go back and double check. Essentially, how the advanced criticals function is a component can either be damaged or destroyed. And if more than 50% of a component is damaged, it is by default destroyed, which means any single component item is by default destroyed with the advanced criticals rule. How were we playing this previously, Michael? How are we doing this wrong?
The default critical hits are pretty straightforward. You roll to see how many crits you land, and then anything that gets crit is destroyed. It can hit you really hard if you take a crit to something that's, important and big, and to then just lose the whole thing. So advanced criticals, specifically the expanded critical damage from TAC Ops, layers on top of that and says, well, if something gets hit, it doesn't necessarily get destroyed. Why is a single 2 damage autocannon pellet destroying an entire, AC-20 in one hit? So expanded critical damage adds a little bit more to that, so it makes it so that things aren't automatically destroyed, they might only be damaged. And that's where our confusion came in, because there's basically, a bunch of paragraphs explaining how when something gets hit, you mark the slot as damaged, not destroyed. And then once a slot is damaged, then at the end of the round, you roll to see what the effect of that damage is. And they have a whole bunch of tables for different types of components to basically see, like, oh, this hit actually had no effect. Oh, this hit reduces the 2-hit roll on your attacks. Or this hit means that the electronic component only works. You have to make a die roll every time you use this component to see whether it works. So we read those parts. We read that criticals do not destroy a component, or they do not destroy a slot automatically. They only damage the slot. And we read all these tables for what happens when you damage each of these. So we were playing that every time you hit anything, it wouldn't destroy the component. It would just maybe damage it. and this made it kind of a nightmare to play. Sometimes you'd start stacking up like critical chances on multiple different components, and you would be rolling a few times every round to be like, "Huh, I wonder if my foot actuator works today. Huh, I wonder whether my C3 system can turn on today." And it that's sort of my experience from this is we turned a relatively straightforward, if a bit brutal critical system into this extremely slow, like all my mech is working half of the time, sort of checks everywhere type thing. And I think Nathan, you were at a game that had someone really suffered badly for this, right?
Once again returning to the horrible game of the tag turrets and arrow forward through crits. So much crazy stuff happened in this game. But basically what happened is a Crockett, which has a base movement speed of 3, had a leg actuator destroyed, a foot actuator damaged, and then a hip actuator damaged. So in reality, all these things are destroyed. So how this played out is the person, so he had a leg actuator destroyed. So his MP is reduced by 1. So he goes from 3 base MP to 2 MP. Then at the beginning of the turn, before he moved, he had to determine if his foot actuator was going to act up. So then he would roll. And if he got above a 7, his foot was okay. If he got below a 7, his foot was worse. So then he'd go to 1 MP. And then he'd have to roll his hip actuator. So he'd roll the hip actuator. The hip actuator was severely damaged, so I believe he had to roll 11 or above. And if he rolled 11 or above, his leg would seize up and his MP would actually return from 1 to 2. And so imagine having to do that every round. It's like, oh, does my ankle hurt? Ow, my ankle hurt. Oh, my hip. Yep, okay, I'm good. I'm good. It really felt like this was like Senior Citizen Simulator 2089 rather than BattleTech in this situation. Oh, it was such a mess. To me, the confusion of this really has stemmed from what it means for something to be damaged. Literally, by putting a line, a little X mark beside the component, that identifies it's damaged. Even if the damage effect says minor damage, no effect, that doesn't matter. Even if it says minor damage, no effect, it's still damaged. So because you roll to see where it hits first, and then that little X signifies its damage, and then you roll to determine the scope of the damage. It doesn't matter if the scope of that damage says nothing, it's still damage. A single component would still get destroyed.
Yeah, and I'll maybe try to clarify. And I think that this is something that you mentioned a couple episodes ago is the lack of keywords in BattleTech can be challenging sometimes. So I think the sort of the key here is the expanded critical damage actually adds a new phase of resolving a critical. So what happens with the expanded critical damage is you apply the crits the same way you normally would, but when you mark off each of those slots, you have damaged that slot. Then at the end of the phase, so after all weapon damage, after all the damage to slots has happened, you actually resolve to see what damage is done to the component. And that's a separate roll, and that happens after everything's already collected for the turn. And so there you roll the 2d6, you add a bonus for the number of damaged slots on the component, and you make a roll to see whether the component is damaged. And that's actually another part that we were doing wrong at the beginning is we were actually rolling for is the component damaged every time it took a crit. But the actual rule is you deal the damage to the slots, and then you only make one roll for every component to see whether it was damaged.
Yeah.
It's messy. It basically adds an extra phase into the critical resolution flow.
Yeah, to me, the confusion stems from they're using damaged in 2 ways. They're saying something's either damaged or destroyed. And then because they say minor damage in the effect table, they should just say minor effect. This. If they didn't say damage there, I think it would be less confusing. Also, there's some basic formatting things they could do to make it more clear. For example, they say this rule does not apply to double heat sinks. It does not apply to engine. It does not apply to
Engine, gyros, sensors, double heat sinks, and physical attack weapons does not apply to.
But you think they'd also say and doesn't apply to single slot items.
Whereas the bit about the single slots is actually in the next paragraph where it's in parentheses and it's attached to a different sentence. So they say, if more than half an item's slots have been damaged, the equipment is considered destroyed. Otherwise, it may continue functioning. And then in brackets, which means a one slot item is still automatically destroyed. So that's burying the lead a little bit. I agree with you. They should lead with that.
What I like about this rule is that it makes the mechs feel less fragile. It's like, you have a small laser penetrates for 1 damage or whatever, and all of a sudden your mech just blows up. To me, it feels like there'd be more redundancy built in, and this rule's really good for that. But the way we were playing it, there was too much redundancy. Like, the mechs were too strong. They were too resilient.
In my experience, criticals haven't been too much of like an unbalancing factor. It feels good when you get a crit, and then it's a bummer when you're like, oh wow, you landed a blow right to my leg actuator, but it did no damage. Anyways, it sort of robs the impact of those moments. So while still leaving intact certain things, because it doesn't impact obviously things like hitting ammunition.
My inclination, like I have a bias towards increasing survivability of my mechs because I prefer to play light mechs. So I think that when I read this rule initially, I interpreted it in a way that was more favorable for the types of units I like to play. I just think overall, the way it's written and the way it actually is a much more balanced way to play. Rather than me have a locust that gets hit 6 times in the foot actuator, which I mean would be probably logistically impossible, but let's say it happens, and my foot actuator doesn't blow. Nothing happens to it. Like, that just seems silly.
Yeah. By the tables, a lot of the tables have, like the equipment critical table has 7 or lower is minor damage, no effect. So you had better odds than a coin flip every time someone shot your leg actuator to just shrug it off.
Yeah, and so that came about a lot. It really made actuators feel really strong. And it also made us, every single time an actuator would actually be damaged, be like, okay, how does this work again? What does this do? Because it would so rarely happen that an actuator would actually go, that every single time it happened, we had to look up the rules. And then, when you have redundancy, like, the foot acts up and then the hip acts up. But when the hip acts up, it's actually better because your leg seizes up. Oh,
And then when we started doing like pilot skill rolls properly and including in the factors for things and being like, oh, I took a bunch of damage, I'm gonna fall over. Is my foot actuator working? Do I take a penalty from that? Like it got real messy. Do I have to make a roll when I'm falling over? Do I have to make a roll for my seatbelt check?
it was a maddening cascading effect and definitely a rule interpretation error on our end. Typical. Oh, BungleTech. Oh, what are you guys thinking? Why do you even play this game?
We enjoy ending friendships and making mistakes.
Selah.
Tertiary objective. Stories of the Inner Sphere segment. Initiating.
Bled. Vipava. Ghost Bear Invasion Corridor. 24th of September, 3050. Point Commander Lauren grimaced in pain as her injured leg slid over loose rubble. Catching herself, she continued toward the small group conferring near the gate of the Clan Ghost Bear compound. Previously a planetary militia position inside the capital city, it had been declared the headquarters of the occupying clan forces due to its convenient location to transportation networks, maintenance bays, and the spaceport. It was a decision she was beginning to reconsider due to the daily mortar attacks from Razahagian rebels. Stepping over a fire hose and sidestepping to avoid a pair of firefighters, she approached the front gate, where she could see Captain Jost Koren of the Bled Police Department waiting alongside his horse. "This crap's starting to piss me off," a voice said beside her. "No casualties. Thank God the secretaries were out to lunch." "Language," Lawrence said, correcting her bondswoman's use of contractions. The local militia, the 22nd Rasalhagian Free Company, had fought honorably and well when the Ghost Bears had taken the planet. Her bondswoman, Zala, had managed to knock Lauren's adder down a slope, but had tumbled down after it in her wyvern due to gyro damage. Lauren had returned to consciousness with her left leg broken in 2 spots, and Zala standing in her cockpit, aiming a pistol at her head. Luckily, they could both hear elementals approaching, and Lauren convinced her to surrender before the armored infantrymen arrived. "This stuff's starting to annoy me. Better, O wise point commander?" Zala quietly replied, tongue firmly in cheek. Lauren sighed and ignored it. Though many clan warriors would have beaten Zala for the impudence, maybe even killed her, Lauren allowed her cheekiness to continue in private because overall it was a small price to pay for her other talents. Zala spoke the local languages, seemed to know everyone worth knowing on Bled, and was an efficient and orderly aide. Best of all, unlike many other Rasalhagian bondmen she'd heard of, Zala was actively trying to conform to the way of the clans. Because of that, Lauren had decided a softer touch would work better on her than an iron fist. "Funny. The office is a loss then, Quiaf?" Lauren asked. "Aft point, Commander." Zala replied formally to the rhetorical question now that they were within earshot of the local police. 2 rounds hit the parade field, but the third, currently estimated to be a 108mm round from the damage, landed straight on the admin building. 3 rounds. Detective, please tell me you have something, Lauren said, turning her attention to the police captain. The tall man swung his hard gaze onto her, and she returned it unflinchingly. The policeman was straight-backed with dark hair going gray at the temples, but maintained a bearing that showed he still found time to work out. His face relented somewhat, and Lauren saw some wariness in the corners of his eyes. She'd initially believed his lack of openness demonstrated his resistance to Clan Ghostbear's control of the world, but her bondswoman had informed her that he held no political concerns as such. He was a law enforcement officer, charged with maintaining order, and considered the Ghost Bear compound to be just another neighborhood to study, watch, and protect. "We've reports of rounds fired from the north side, Point Commander. One of my officers could hear the mortar echoing down an alley, but by the time he got on scene, he saw nothing." "Was he mounted?" Zala asked, stroking the neck of Corrin's mount. He nodded. "How long does it take a horse to cover a block?" Lauren asked. Zala snorted. "If the sidewalk was clear, 30 seconds, maybe a little longer. These horses are big and fast." "The officer said he was on scene in under 2 minutes, Corrin answered. "He had to go up 2 blocks in over 1. Lauren nodded as she saw 3 people, 2 men and a woman, approaching from the garrison barracks. Seeing the scowl on the woman's face, she decided to wrap things up. "Zala, finish debriefing Police Captain Jost and then meet me in the conference room." 10 minutes later, Zala entered the conference room, slipping into her chair in the midst of a heated discussion. 3 mortar rounds this morning makes 15 over the past 2 weeks. And we all know we will receive at least 1 round tonight, said Star Commander Antoinette, one of the Steel Viper Mechwarriors, scowling. Still clad in her skin-tight blue and yellow cooling suit, the athletic woman had returned from patrol just after the rounds landed. The route had taken her through the city's south side, the opposite direction of the mortar's point of origin, a fact no one believed to be a coincidence. She had pulled her hood off, her ink-black hair streaming behind her and gleaming in the fluorescent light. Her dark eyes flashed as she continued. "Or does your captain have some reason to believe this attack has depleted them of ammunition?" Zala flared for a second, but quickly brought her temper under control, for which Lauren was thankful. Had her bondswoman publicly disrespected Antoinette, the Steel Viper would have immediately corrected her, probably with lethal consequences. Zala looked at her datapad, reviewing her notes. "Ammo for the calibers targeting us come 12 and 8 to a case. Since we've received 14 75mm and 3 big ones this morning, Captain Corrin estimates we can expect at least 10 more small ones and 5 more 108s. Silence dominated the table for a moment as her words sank in.
Captain Corin is honest and reliable, according to my reports,
interjected the thin man sitting across the table from the Mechwarrior. Clad in a business suit and with a white robe carefully folded across the back of his chair, Comstar Precentor Alvarez looked comfortable even surrounded by clan warriors.
No, Star Commander. The problem is the rebels have infiltrated his force, as they have every organization on planet. They haven't taken to attacking their own countrymen. Yet. But their so-called resistance finds it no trouble at all to avoid those either trying to help us or simply carrying on their duty.
He leaned back, interlacing his fingers, thinking as Lawrence studied him. Like the police captain, Precentor Alvarez did not seem to particularly like or dislike the clans. His superiors had ordered him to help administer the world for the Ghost Bears, and he was doing his best to execute those orders.
"We could burn the city to the ground," the Steel Viper said, menace in her voice. "On your behalf, of course, Point Commander,"
she added, turning to Lauren with a wicked smile. Lauren's eyes narrowed in irritation. Since beginning their invasion of the Inner Sphere, Clan Ghost Bear had been leaving minimal garrisons behind on the conquered worlds. In the invasion's early stages, they left behind only their wounded, giving them time to heal while executing the light duty of bringing an entire world into submission. Unfortunately for the clan, this had resulted in numerous worlds overthrowing their garrisons and forcing the Ghost Bears to slow their forward assault to secure their lines. Clan Ghost Bear had swallowed its pride and asked for help, striking a deal with Clan Steel Viper for warriors to assist in garrisoning Ghost Bear worlds. Steel Viper frontline units, nominally under the command of the highest-ranking bear on planet, soon arrived, eager to fight any opponent and prove their value among the invading clans. Lauren, as the only ambulatory Ghost Bear mech warrior, was left in command of an ad hoc point of injured elementals when the rest of her cluster departed Vipava for the clan's next target. Antoinette's attitude constantly irritated Lauren, but as none of her wounded elementals could wear their armor, and she could barely pilot a battle mech with her injured leg, she was very happy to have the Vipers on world with her. Even though Antoinette commanded a reinforced star, 5 Omni-Mechs and 5 points of elementals, a star variant the Vipers called a Rattler, her Vipers were stretched thin across the city, and she was also getting frustrated by the rebels and their ability to consistently elude her patrols.
"I would prefer to keep raising the capital's Plan B for now," Lauren replied dryly. "Do you have any further notes, Zala?" "Point Commander, the police captain did have one more item of interest," Zala began, hesitantly. "He is hearing rumors that the rebels have found the Ronin."
Lauren cocked her head, confused, but Precentor Alvarez slowly sat back in his chair and whistled quietly.
"That's not good,"
he said, and then turned to Lauren.
"About 20 years ago, several Draconis Combine units went rogue, trying to keep what would become the Free Razahog Republic in the Combine. The coordinator declared these units Ronin, that is, warriors without honor or lawful master, an incredibly shameful designation in their culture. Here on Vipava, the 10 surviving Ronin mech warriors conducted seppuku, the ritualistic suicide of the disgraced, but their battle mechs were never found. Until now, apparently,"
he asked, turning back toward Zala.
10 ancient battle mechs,"
the Steel Viper interjected, a vicious smile on her face.
"I hope this rumor is true. If my clan is not moved from reserve status to active status in this invasion, this may be my star's only opportunity for glory."
Lauren looked at her bondswoman, who seemed uncharacteristically embarrassed.
"This is unconfirmed, Quiaf? The detective is still investigating these rumors?" "AF Point Commander, Captain Korn has someone he wants to talk to. A person with experience in this sort of guerrilla campaign. Someone who might know about the Ronin,"
Zala said, her cheeks red in embarrassment. Lauren quirked an eyebrow, looking around the table at the others, first at Alvarez, then Antoinette, and finally Benjamin, the Ghost Bear Elemental Point Commander who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table. He shook his head. He'd been spending almost as much time with Zala as Lauren had, teaching the bondswoman Ghost Bear customs and working on her hand-to-hand combat skills. Now, curious, especially since the precentor seemed to know who this person was, Lauren turned back toward Zala.
Who, bondswoman? Zala studied the floor, hooked some of her hair over her ear as she shuffled, and replied without looking up. My father. As casually as she could, Lauren reached up and grabbed the handle on the ceiling of the police cruiser as Captain Corrin took a curve at what she thought was near impossible speed. Somehow, though, the tires maintained their grip on the mountain road and the cruiser kept from plummeting hundreds of meters down a sheer cliff. The view is worth it, trust me, Corrin promised. Lauren glanced over, unsure if he was teasing her or not. Then, as the car completed the curve and cleared the mountain blocking her view, she could see what Corrin was talking about. Great Kerensky, she whispered, and then glanced into the back seat. Benjamin sat next to Zala, and Lauren could see he was in as much awe as she was. Bled, the capital of Ipava, curved around the shore of a large bay. The curves of the bay consisted of rolling, forested hills that bled into another large semicircle around the city, the mountain ridge they were traveling on. The apex of the mountain curve was about 50 kilometers outside town. The land between them was fields of cropland. From her vantage point, Lauren could see over the entire bay. Corrin pulled off into a designated scenic view, and the four of them exited the car. Below them, the bay was a deep, luxurious sapphire, small triangles of sail-marked pleasure craft, and Lauren spotted small dots of fishing boats returning through the narrow bay entrance with their late catches. There is nothing like this at home. I always knew the inner sphere would look beautiful, but I could never have imagined anything like this, she quietly said to Corrin. She noticed Benjamin and Zala also having a similar subdued conversation off to her right. Sometimes, Corrin began, before pausing, sometimes after a particularly rough case, after seeing the worst of what humanity can do to itself, I like to come up here, just to reflect, to remember that life is worth fighting the dark for. She nodded and smiled at his openness, thinking that maybe she would not mind spending an evening alone with him. As she made a mental note to ask Zala about spheroid mating customs later, Corrin cleared his throat. Of course, this terrain is also your problem. Tactically and philosophically, you understand. He went on, all business. His sudden shift jarred her thoughts, and he saw the confusion on her face. The north and south sides of Bled merge into the ridge lines that run out to sea and form the arms of the bay. So it is child's play for the rebels to run in and out of the mountains. He pointed to two small figures moving west out of the city. Additionally, from anywhere along the ridge, rebels can see any movements out of the city you might make. That appears to be Antoinette and her battle cobra and one of her summoners. And as for the philosophical point, he looked at her. This is land worth fighting for. She nodded. Point taken. She turned again toward the view. A land worth fighting for, indeed. 15 minutes of driving brought them to the small town of Zelesniki, an alpine village nestled between two mountains. As they passed through, Lauren noticed the lack of motorized vehicles. Though there were some, it seemed that most of the people in town rode horses, singly or hitched to wagons. Is this common in the mountains? More horses than cars? She asked. Yes, Point Commander, Zala replied. Our people have been raising and breeding horses since we left Terra. It is a point of pride among us. Many of those living in cities have at least one horse stabled in a small town somewhere. We are born in the saddle, as they say. My family, she trailed off, watching the last of town pass by. My family is well known for our breeding techniques. I think well known is a bit of an understatement, Zala, Corrin said, but they can explain for themselves. He pulled through a wrought iron gate into a rolling, well-manicured field. In the distance, a herd of mottled gray horses slowly moved and grazed. Heading up a long gravel road, the cruiser passed a series of buildings Zala identified in turn, several of them stables. As they pulled up in front of a large mansion, Lauren saw a round, cheerful woman with long gray hair standing next to a bent old man leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane. They stopped, and Zala jumped out. Mom, Dad! She hugged them in turn as the other three exited. You both know Captain Corrin, she said as he stepped forward to present them both with a bottle of wine. A local custom when visiting, he'd explained to Lauren in the car. This is Benjamin, Zala went on. I mean, Point Commander Benjamin. Lauren saw both Corin and Zala's mother narrow their eyes and knew she had missed something important. She made another mental note as Zala went on saying, This is Point Commander Lauren, the Ghost Bear Administrator of Ipava, and my, She trailed off. Zala is my bondswoman, Lauren put simply. It is very nice to meet you.
Slave?
The man asked darkly. No, Dad. More an indentured aide-de-camp. It is complicated, Zala finished, flustered.
Your daughter fought bravely and honorably in defense of your world. We've adopted her into our clan, and in time she will finish her probationary period and become a full warrior among the Ghost Bears,
Benjamin said, more words than Lauren could remember him ever saying. The man nodded, accepting the answer.
You have the data?
He asked Corin, and then accepted a data disk from the policeman.
Very well. Please, make yourselves at home. Zala can show you around.
Zala turned. I guess I should start by showing you the heirs. 15 minutes later, they entered a large oval-shaped building that smelled of horses and manure. In the center, 10 gray horses with riders were performing intricate maneuvers. More horses? Lauren asked. Zala looked appalled, and then she shook her head. Point Commander, these are not just horses. These are Lipizzans. Seeing the lack of comprehension on Lauren and Benjamin's face, she took a deep breath. Okay. Lipizzans are one of the most regulated and controlled breed of horse in existence. The recognized beginning can be traced to a single stud back in 1580. 30 years from now will be the 1500th anniversary of this breed. She looked at the horses and then back. As of now, there are only 37 recognized mare lines and 12 stud lines. We have the only recognized stud line from Terra itself. Our ancestors received permission to take frozen genetic material with them when they departed to colonize this planet. Watching these horses perform is like seeing a living piece of Terran history. Lauren looked at Benjamin and then back at the horses. Great Kerensky, she whispered.
This has been an excerpt from the short story Airs Above the Ground, written by Jason Hansa. The rest of the captivating story can be found in Shrapnel, the BattleTech magazine, issue 1. And that, my fellow BattleTech newbies, experts, and bungler friends alike, is a wrap. Have anything you want to share? We've already gotten some great messages from the community that has given us content to share for our next episodes, and we truly love to hear from you. If you want to reach out, you can find us on Twitter at BungleTechTweet and via email at bungletech@outlook.com. Until next time, Mechwarriors, good fortunes on the battlefield. Selah.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.